Hi everybody, welcome to chapter 15. She's back. Dee Dee ran across the playground screaming. At first, Louis thought she was just having fun, but then he realized something was wrong. He hurried after her and grabbed her arm. Dee Dee, are you all right? He asked. She stared at him wide-eyed as she continued to scream. Several other kids gathered around. What's wrong with Dee Dee? Asked Myron. I don't know, said Louis. Dee Dee hiccuped 3 times, then gasped, I saw her. Who? Asked Louis. Dee Dee didn't answer. She just stared right through him. But everyone else knew whom Dee Dee had seen. Most of them had seen her too during the last 2 weeks. Where was she? Asked Todd. On the monkey bars, said Dee Dee, still trembling and breathing hard. I was hanging upside down, and suddenly she was hanging upside down right next to me. Did she wiggle her ears? Asked Jenny. Only one, said Dee Dee. I jumped off and ran away before she could wiggle the other one. That's good, said Rondi. Who is she? Asked Louis. A hippopotamus? No, said Myron with a laugh. Why do you say that? Because when a hippopotamus gets mad, it wiggles its ears. She's worse than a hippopotamus, said Allison. I saw her last week at the water fountain, said Todd. I bent down to get a drink, and then there she was, drinking at the faucet right next to me. I saw her on the stairs, said Rondi. I was going up the stairs, and she went right past me, sliding down on the banister. Who? Asked Louis. Mrs. Gorf, said Dee Dee. Just saying the name out loud sent a shiver of fear through her body. Oh, your old teacher, said Louis with a shrug. Is she back? I always wondered what happened to her. The children looked at each other. Mrs. Gorf was the teacher they had had before Mrs. Jules took over. They had never told anyone how they had gotten rid of her. They especially couldn't tell Louis. She was the meanest teacher in the history of Wayside School. Of course, there are other teachers at other schools who are meaner. Louis looked toward the monkey bars. I don't see her, he said. Well, she was there, Dee Dee insisted. I saw her. You just imagined you saw her, Dee Dee, said Louis. If you hate somebody or if you love somebody, you often think you see that person when she isn't there. It's very common. It's just like Mrs. Drazel. Who's Mrs. Drazel? Asked Todd. She was the worst teacher I ever had, said Louis. He shivered just thinking about her. She was my teacher when I was your age. I sometimes think I see her too, and I still have nightmares about her. Was she mean? Asked Rondi. She was horrible, said Louis. Every morning she used to check our fingernails. If they were dirty, she'd tell the whole class. Louis has dirty fingernails this morning, she'd say in a really nasty voice. And if you talked in class, she would pick up the wastepaper basket and put it over your head. You had to leave it on your head until the bell rang. Did she ever put it on your head? Asked Todd. Lots of times, said Louis. Everybody laughed. Wasn't funny, said Louis. My mother always knew when I got in trouble because I had bits of trash stuck in my hair. Did it get stuck in your mustache too? Asked Rondi. Louis didn't have a mustache when he was our age, said Allison. Did you, Louis? She asked. Suddenly, Louis screamed. Everyone stared at him. She's back, he shouted as he shook with fear. Then he slapped himself in the face. Excuse me, he said. Sorry, for a second I thought I saw Mrs. Drazel. He turned to Dee Dee. Come on, let's go to the monkey bars. No, declared Dee Dee. I'm not going back. I'm never getting on the monkey bars again. Louis took a hold of her hand. Mrs. Gorf isn't there. You just imagined her. They headed to the monkey bars. No one else dared to follow. If she starts to wiggle her ears, run away as fast as you can, warned Dee Dee. She held tightly on to Louis's hand. When they reached the monkey bars, no one was there. Where were you when you saw her? Louis asked. I was hanging upside down over there, said Dee Dee, pointing. Okay, go hang upside down, said Louis. No, exclaimed Dee Dee. Don't worry, I'll be right here in case anything happens. It had rained during the night, so the sand under the monkey bars was wet and somewhat hard. Dee Dee walked across the sand and pulled herself up on the bar. She hooked her legs over and then hung from her knees. Well, what do you see? What does that say? Sorry, everyone, I can't read it. Dee Dee pulled herself right side up, then hopped down from the monkey bars. She and Lewis walked away hand in hand. She held Lewis's hand not because she was scared, but because she liked him. Mrs. Drazel sounds almost as bad as Mrs. Gorse, said Dee Dee. She was, said Lewis. She once made me put gum on my nose because I was chewing it in class. How can you chew your nose, said Dee Dee. Behind them, Dee Dee's footprints could be seen in the wet sand under the monkey bars. There was also another set of footprints made by a person who had much bigger feet. Chapter 16. Love and the Dead Rat. Damien was in love with one of the girls in his class. Can you guess which one? He thought about her all the time. Myron threw a red ball to Damien. It bounced off his face. Huh? Said Damien. Why didn't you catch the ball? Asked Myron. What ball? Asked Damien. The one that hit you in the face, said Myron. Did a ball hit me in the face? Asked Damien. Yes, said Myron. Oh, good. I was wondering why my nose hurt. He had been thinking about the girl he loved. He was in love with Mrs. Jules. That was why he was always doing things for her, like passing out papers. He thought she was very pretty and nice. He thought she was smart, too. In fact, he thought she was one of the smartest people in the class. After recess, he hurried back up the stairs. Hello, Damien, said Mrs. Jules. Hello, Mrs. Jules, he said. You're always the first one here, aren't you? Asked Mrs. Jules. Damien blushed and shrugged his shoulders. Do you need any papers passed out or anything? He asked. It's so nice of you to ask, said Mrs. Jules. I think you're nice too, said Damien. Mrs. Jules gave him a stack of workbooks to hand out. Then she gave him a Tootsie Roll Pop from the coffee can on her desk for being so helpful. But don't eat it till after lunch, she said. I won't, he assured her. He ate lunch with Myron and DJ, saved his Tootsie Roll Pop for last. Joy and Mauricia came up behind him. Hi, Damien, said Joy. How's your girlfriend? What? Asked Damien. He turned red. Who are you talking about? I don't have a girlfriend. You're in love with Mrs. Jules, accused Mauricia. Better watch out, said Joy. Mrs. Jules might come after you. The two girls laughed. I don't know what you're talking about, said Damien. I'm not in love with Mrs. Jules. He looked to his friends for support. Myron shrugged. DJ smiled. Prove it, said Joy. Prove you're not in love with her. That's stupid, said Damien. How can I prove I'm not in love with Mrs. Jules? Give her this, said Joy. She handed Damien a paper bag. Your lunch? Asked Damien. Look inside, said Mauricia. Inside the paper bag was a dead rat. Damien knew Mrs. Jules hated dead rats more than anything in the world. Put it in her desk, said Joy. If you don't, it means you love her, said Mauricia. I'm not in love with her, said Damien. Prove it, said Joy. Okay, I will. The girls left. You don't have to put the dead rat in her desk, said DJ. We don't care, said Myron. You think I'm in love with her too, don't you? Asked Damien. Myron shrugged. DJ smiled. Some friend you are, said Damien. I'll show you. After lunch, he was the first one back to class. He carried Joy's paper sack. Hello, Damien, said Mrs. Jules. Did you have a nice lunch? It was all right, he muttered. Oh, would you mind getting the construction paper from the closet and putting it on my desk? Asked Mrs. Jules. Thank you. Damien went to the closet and got the construction paper. He put it on her desk. Then, when she wasn't looking, he opened the desk drawer and dumped the dead rat into it. He shut the drawer. Thank you, Damien, said Mrs. Jules. You're always so helpful. It's such a pleasure to have you in my class. Damien felt awful. Mrs. Jules read a story to the class. Damien couldn't pay attention. He kept wondering when she'd open her drawer. After the story, they had art. Everyone was supposed to make snowflakes. Damien folded his piece of construction paper in half. Mrs. Jules screamed. What's wrong, Mrs. Jules? Asked Joy. Somebody put a dead rat in my desk, said Mrs. Jules. I did, declared Damien. Damien? Said Mrs. Jules with great surprise. Why? Because I hate you, said Damien. You're always making me do things for you. Oh, I see, said Mrs. Jules. Should I write my name on the board under the word discipline? He asked. No, that won't be necessary, said Mrs. Jules. That made him feel even worse. Why did I have to prove myself to Joy, he wondered. I don't like Joy. I like Mrs. Jules. He felt rotten. When the bell rang, Damien waited for all the other kids to leave. Then he walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. She was grading papers. Yes, Damien? Do you want me to erase the board for you? He asked. That's all right, said Mrs. Jewls. I'll do it myself. Damien sadly walked out of the room and down the stairs. When he reached the bottom, he turned and ran all the way back up to Mrs. Jewls' room. She was just putting on her coat. I love you, Mrs. Jewls, Damien declared. I'm sorry I put the dead rat in your desk. I did it because I didn't want everyone to know I loved you. I'm sorry. I love you too, Damien, said Mrs. Jewls. You do? But what about Mr. Jewls? Just because I love Mr. Jewls doesn't mean I can't also love you. Love is different from most things. She picked up a piece of chalk. If I gave my piece of chalk to someone, then I wouldn't have it anymore. But when I give my love to someone, I end up with more love than I started with. The more love you give away, the more you have left. Damien smiled. I love you, Mrs. Jewls, he said. He felt his heart fill up with more love. I love you, Damien, said Mrs. Jewls. This is getting disgusting, said the dead rat. It climbed out of Mrs. Jewls' desk and walked out of the room.